Chapter 28, Year 889 PXF, Late Autumn. Serena smiled graciously at the two commoners from the orchard who had arrived in her parlor via the returning stone she had provided them.
"Oi, we came here right like you said,"
the one called Landers proclaimed.
"We didn't even get our free cider out of that old bag Milgren, so I suppose you owe us." "And don't you go acting all poor and destitute or nothing,"
the one called Jenkins added.
"We reckon you're pretty well off and got some magic of your own, 'cause ain't no one who just hands out a returning stone. Yeah, we could have sold that for good coin, but out of the graciousness of our hearts, we done come back with this here note,"
Landers said with a lofty air.
"Given us by the Lady Milgren herself."
Landers placed the note on the table with an awkward flourish.
"Of course,"
Serena practically purred at the two.
"I am deeply indebted to your graciousness. Let me see what I can offer you two fine gents."
Serena, wearing a glamour to make herself look like an eccentric commoner, made a great show of looking around the room that she had likewise cloaked in illusions. It currently appeared to be the small hovel outside the walls of Arnador where she typically received informants from around the region. With a far more polished flourish than Landers had displayed with the note, she turned around with an object in each hand.
"As you so cleverly surmised, I do indeed have a bit of magic, and while I have little use for coin, I have plenty of enchanted items to trade."
Serena placed the two items on the table.
"One for each of you, but you will have to choose who gets what."
She continued, motioning to the vial of swirling liquid she had placed on the table before them.
"This is an elixir of perpetual good health. You will never get ill or suffer from pestilence, and most injuries will heal practically overnight."
She then motioned to the silver ring beside the potion.
"And this is a silver tongue ring. No matter how bold the lie, people will believe what you say is true."
The two looked covetously at the items before them, but she could see the telltale workings of a devious mind behind Jenkins' eyes.
"Oi, I'll take the ring,"
Jenkins said.
"'Cause you got that cough come every winter, and you can finally get rid of those scabies you're always itching at." "That's mighty thoughtful of you,"
Landers said, offering his hand for a shake.
"I do hate them little buggers always irritating me."
The two shook hands with a smile and gentlemanly nod. Jenkins snatched the ring quick as a viper and placed it on his finger.
"Landers, that vial is poison. Don't you drink it no matter what she says,"
he said in a calm voice.
"She's trying to kill you. You should run."
Landers looked with horror at the vial and then Serena before bolting for the illusionary door. Serena remained silent, watching the scene unfold before her. Jenkins immediately grabbed the vial and chugged it down. Landers said with rising panic as he fumbled with the doorknob,
"Hey, the door's locked!"
He looked over his shoulder as Serena allowed all the illusions cloaking the cell they occupied fade away and dropped the glamour she had wrapped herself in. Landers' screams of terror were only matched by Jenkins' gurgling screech of agony as his flesh began to writhe and twist under his skin as the potion began its grim work. Serena calmly read and pocketed the note. Turning from her two visitors, she strode from the cell, locking it behind her. 2 days would be plenty of time to prepare. Traversing the rest of the cells filled with her creations, she arrived where she had secured her other guest and looked in on him. Quentin's eyes blazed with unmasked hatred as Serena peered through the small window in his prison's door. He strained against the chains binding him to the wall, clenching his teeth in frustration and fury. The black runes carved into the stones of his cell flashed sickly green at his rising anger until he lowered his eyes and slumped back to the ground. Everything was working out perfectly. Soon the vermilion blade would be hers, and she would free herself from Toman Corvermain. Time had not been kind to Serena. 3 years ago, when her attempts to retrieve the vermilion blade from the Uldani Isles failed disastrously, Toman paid her a visit. Her uncle did not tolerate disobedience. It was bad enough that she had attempted to reclaim the blade without his consent or knowledge, but her failure in such a public manner while implicating Elleryon was intolerable. The reprimand he administered to Serena had been cruel, brutal, and unending. He had violated her mind, flesh, and soul within her own home for months before his anger was sated. When Tommen had finally left her for dead, Serena had been reduced to something lesser than even one of her mutated creations held captive in the dungeons. However, her magic had protected the one part of her that was truly her own, an undetected and unscathed white-hot need to kill Tommen Courvermain. After Tommen's admonishments, Serena had licked her wounds, freed all the creatures she was working on to roam Arnador, and abandoned Elleryon. If she were ever to have a chance at killing Tommen, she must possess the Vermilion Blade. She might have been thwarted in her attempts to reach Osmond on the Uldani Isles, but she had never forgotten that strange second path she detected with Tommen's blood leading away from the Isles to the west. Serena looked again at the slumping form of Quentin. He had been at the end of that trail of blood magic, and now he was delivering Serena her salvation. Osmond, wearing the trickster's form, was dozing on the barrel storage roof when Thorn found him. It had not been a peaceful rest. The guilt plaguing Osmond's mind had disallowed sleep, and he had long since finished his morning hunt for rodents. "We're leaving for Balinons within the hour. I'll meet you by the central tree." Thorn's delivery was brusque and cold. Osmond slunk through the grove, the trickster's head and tail hung low to wait by the tree for Thorn's arrival. Half an hour later, he arrived laden with packs and the strange quiver that held the fake Vermilion Blade. With no more than a nod of acknowledgement to Osmond, Thorn said, "Well, here we go." He lifted Balinon's returning stone to activate it, leaving Osmond barely any time to leap on his shoulder before they disappeared. Upon their arrival, Thorn unceremoniously shrugged Osmond off his tense form, saying, "Balinon has warded this place against magical scrying, so you can show yourself." Osmond shimmered to his Uldani form in a sparking of embers as Thorn turned and walked away. Osmond looked around the dim chamber lit by the soft buzzing glow of arcane light. He could pick out the familiar details that revealed it to be the baths below the Sojourn's Rest, but it was devastating to see them so changed from how he remembered them. A half-elf with a shaved head came up the steps out of the drained central pool. "Valhanari, cousin," he said, offering the traditional greeting between elves and Uldani. "I am Balinon, and you must be Osmond. We've never met, but I have heard stories of your time with Talon."
"Valhanari," Osmond replied with a bow of respect. "Thank you for your hospitality. We honor the opening of your home to us and offer deference to our elders."
Osmond recited the formal words unused by him for decades, adding his own commentary.
"However, we are perhaps not the most gracious company right now."
Balinon looked across the dark chamber to where Osmond could see Thorn near a row of cots sorting items from pack to pack. He said, "While Talon was known for his bouts of pique as a child, I must admit I have never known Thorn to have them." The half-elf looked back at Osmond. "But if you are to have any hope of success tomorrow, you should not carry this animosity between you any further. If you cannot forgive one another, at least find a balance between you." Balinon drifted away back to his work. Balance. There was that word again. Thorn had spoken about his conjoined god of nature. His own journey had taken him to the inception points between paired elements. The Vermilion Blade and the orchard, the past and the future, all felt like they were balanced precariously on the fulcrum of now. 3 months ago, in time as he knew it, Osmond was holding Quentin in his arms as a newborn infant, but that was 27 years ago to the man now held captive in the keep. Osmond felt the keel of his connection to Quentin beating in rhythm beside his heart. His eyes then found Thorn, now sitting on a small cot across the room, shoulders slumped, head in hands with hair cascading like a curtain shrouding his downturned face. A wave of tenacious resolve washed over Osmond. to protect his brother, to protect Quentin, and to protect a love that had endured nearly 40 years. Osmond's back straightened as the keel of his responsibility to them reinforced his spine, and then he felt them, the prince's massive antlers weighing upon his brow. Osmond drew the dagger from his belt. It had become a wicked, curved bone knife with a hilt of raw antler. As he held it, Osmond felt a strange tightness in his skin as though it was made of tanned leather. On a hunch, Osmond drew the blade across his palm. It left nary a trace nor cut. He tested the edge with his thumb and felt its razor sharpness. Osmond tried it again on his palm using far more pressure than should be required, and this time it did bite into the flesh, but just barely. Osmond wanted to abide by Thorn's wishes and respect his space, but knowing the full extent of the prince's blade could be critical. Osmond crossed the room to Thorn, walking between the drained central pool and the roiling surface of the heated pool that Balanon seemed to now use for sterilization. He stood a short distance from Thorn, waiting to be noticed and invited closer. Thorn did not change his position, speaking to him with his head still down, words addressing the floor. "You can use one of the cots at the end of the row." "Thorn, I've unlocked the prince's dagger," Osmond said softly. "It's protective somehow, but I don't know to what extent." Thorn released a heavy sigh and lifted his head, looking to Osmond's face, a rueful retort on his lips. Before he could say anything, his eyes crinkled in amusement and said, "Those are new." "What?" Osmond asked, bewildered. Thorn's eyes were on Osmond's forehead. "Oh, gods!" Osmond's free hand snapped to his temple. It never occurred to him they could be real. The keel of the antlers resting on his brow would be far too large to fit on his head without scraping the low ceilings of the baths. The prince's antlers were a fearsome array of dagger-like spikes as tall as a broadsword. What Osmond's hand encountered wasn't even remotely like what his keel felt. He instead discovered a tiny little velvet-covered, two-pointed antler smaller than a child's outstretched hand. Osmond's mouth hung open as he explored their diminutive profile, feeling the keel of a phantom zit sprout on his nose. I... Osmond began to stammer. "Aw, aren't you just the most adorable reindeer in the New Dawn Parade?" Thorn mocked brotherly. "It feels like they're ridiculous. Are they ridiculous?" Osmond asked frantically. "Their keel is as large as the prince's rack of antlers, 12.5 points, each as large as a sword." "We can discuss your inflated opinion of yourself another time," Thorn teased. Thorn's words instantly transported Osmond to the similar words he had used with Yanri, and his slack-jawed embarrassment turned to laughter. Thorn smiled and let out a slight chuckle that faded quickly as the surprise of Osmond's antlers faded. "So the dagger?" Thorn asked, his voice now an even monotone. Osmond presented it to him, hands still unconsciously drawn to the nubby antlers sprouted from his temples. After a moment and a quick casting, Thorn handed it back. "Protective is correct, and not insubstantial. It will help you resist most damage, both physical and magical. It could be a big help if things go badly and you have to confront Serena directly." "You." Osmond's mind hung on the word. It was the plan, of course. There was no denying that was what they had agreed upon and discussed, but it felt so lonely to hear it. Thorn was going to get in and get Quentin, while Osmond distracted Serena and hopefully trapped her with the cursed replica of the Vermilion Blade. Osmond would channel the trickster, translocating himself to them in the dungeons. Then, utilizing the returning stone Naz had given Thorn years ago, they would escape to Oldstone. If anything went wrong, Thorn and Quentin should leave without him. That was the plan. Thorn had turned his attention back to the packs, pulling out the tight-fitting tunic and leathers Gwen had dyed black for him. A dark pair of artificer goggles lay beside them. Thorn handed Osmond the quiver holding the false vermilion blade and the single apple. Without further acknowledgement, he said, "You'll need these." "Thorn, Osmond began, but the words caught in his throat as he saw his brother freeze in place and tense up. He wanted to say so much, but could tell Thorn didn't want to hear it.
I'm sorry,
Osmond said, and walked to the far end of the row of cots. He took out the prince's dagger and looked at it. His hand went to his temple, but the little antlers had melded back into his flesh, his confidence no longer as indefatigable as it had been. This didn't feel like balance. Maybe balance wasn't possible when it came to such moments. One side or the other would prevail, light or darkness, good or evil, family or fate.